going on, everybody? Welcome to another Three Geeks Conversation. Jason and Justin. Today we're joined by Keith. He's the author of Stalked. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, gentlemen.
I am fascinated by your story, and I've been, doing some research. But tell me more about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Tampa Bay area in Florida, primarily. Most of my life, I traveled out to Arizona to go to college at Arizona State. Started my hospitality career, which eventually led me to Beverly Hills and Aspen, Colorado, which brought this story forward because I met Nicole in Aspen, Colorado, and I became the operating partner for Mezzaluna Restaurants, which ended up being where Ron Goldman was employed in Brentwood, California, where Nicole had her last meal. That was one of my restaurants.
Wow. What made you decide now to write the book?
Well, quite honestly, I felt safer after OJ died. There's some stuff in the book that obviously isn't very flattering for him. I'm certainly not a fan of his from what he put us through and from what he ended up ultimately doing. I was offered book deals over the years, very heavily during the trial and shortly thereafter, and I turned everything down. And I just sort of thought about it over the years, but never really took it too seriously. And when he died, the media sort of came out of the woodwork. And I just thought to myself, there's still such an interest in this. And I never really got to tell Nick's side of the story. I called her Nick, so I'll refer to her as that during the interview mostly. But, most of the time in stuff, it's OJ, and OJ's defense team. And, it all gets caught up in that. And Nicole and Ron are almost an afterthought, sadly, in most of the stories. So I thought it was important to really tell of our shared experience, what we went through, how we dealt with it, how it affected both of us during that period of time, and ultimately how it led to her death.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the book? Because this might be the first time folks are hearing about it. So I'd love for you to kind of give just a general overview of
Well, I wrote it. I'm a first-time writer, so hopefully the readers will understand that. I wasn't going for something professional or polished. I didn't bring in writers to help me out with the project. I wanted to make it, sort of passionate from my heart and almost like a walking journal. I wanted to take the reader through the events that we lived, good, bad, and indifferent. I wanted them to feel kind of the emotions that we felt when we were going through all this stuff and what it felt like to be in the middle of it. It was just a crazy, surrealistic scene from my vantage point. Obviously, the woman I loved was murdered, and there was a 7 or 8 day period of time there where I went from finding out that the woman I was madly in love with was murdered violently, knowing that he was responsible for it, to flying out to Los Angeles immediately. I was a pallbearer at her funeral 3 days after the murder, 4 days after the murder, where I had to stand elbow to elbow with the guy who murdered her because he wasn't arrested till the next day. The Bronco chase wasn't until the day after the funeral. So all these emotions are conjured up. And the crazy thing is I hadn't spoken to Nicole for about 6 months or so prior to her murder because of OJ. They had an incident where those famous 911 tapes that everyone's heard now from October of '93, that was all about me. That was an incident that arose on the movie set that day from a girl that I knew that approached OJ and mentioned my name, and he went crazy, went home and kicked in the door and ripped up Nicole's phone book with my number in it and tore up all of our photos. And, everybody, the whole world heard his anger and his threats on the 911 tapes. So that led to us not being able to speak to each other because they were still trying that ill-fated reconciliation that ultimately led to her and Ron's death. But he refused to let her have any contact with me anymore. And we were best of friends at that point. We hadn't been romantic for about a year because they were trying a reconciliation, but we still talked at least a couple of times a week. It went from talking every day to when they started dating again to talking a couple of times a week. But we always kept in touch. She always checked with me about what my feelings were, about how things were going with her. So when that blow up happened in October and he refused to let her have any contact with me, it broke my heart. But I sort of just moved on, hoping that someday there would be some sort of reconciliation with us. That I knew in my heart that it wouldn't work out. I knew that she wanted to try it just because she ultimately just wanted her family together. She was such a good mother, and she wanted the father of her children, as bad as OJ was. She believed that maybe he had a chance at changing. So she gave him one last chance, sadly. But, because we didn't speak all that time, I didn't really know what was going on in her life. I knew that they were trying a reconciliation. So when she was murdered and I flew out, I hadn't spoke to her for, like I said, 6 to 8 months. Next thing you know, I'm holding her casket at the funeral, standing next to the guy I know murdered her. And in that same wild, crazy period, 7-day period, her family gets out of the limo at the funeral and tells me face to face that she was talking about me the night she was murdered. And I just broke down. I mean, I imagine my emotions at that point, knowing that how I still felt about her and knowing that she was thinking of me the night she was murdered. So it was almost too much to bear. And then having to stand next to this guy, elbow to elbow, almost for about 3 or 4 hours. I mean, between the mass and the burial, it was a long afternoon. So it was pretty crazy. And then you flash forward to the next day, not even 24 hours later, is the Bronco chase, which was insane in itself. And then 2 days later, I'm thrown in front of a grand jury to give testimony about all the stalking incidents and the violence that we incurred at his hands. So imagine that as a week. I hope your listeners can kind of put that into context and think to themselves, oh my God, I mean, my head was about to explode just from all that going on in the same week. But I got through it, and it took me years to process it, obviously, but it was crazy.
I had a friend who was killed a few years ago, and it's a wild experience that a lot of people can't relate to, and just having somebody taken from you like that. But how did you and Nicole meet?
Well, I had 2 restaurants in Aspen I was responsible for, and 3 in Los Angeles. The main focus of that restaurant group was Mezzaluna. So I had the Mezzaluna in Aspen, Colorado, which I opened in 1986-ish. And then Beverly Hills and Brentwood in California. So my normal routine was back and forth, high seasons in Aspen. And then I kept an apartment in Los Angeles, and I'd go out and oversee operations in those 2 restaurants after opening them over the years. Well, I'm skiing one day in Aspen in January of 1992. I remember it was a beautiful day. It was almost like a spring skiing day, which doesn't happen in January very often. And it was the end of the day, and I was on the ski deck after a beautiful day of skiing, and I looked across, and it was like a vision. It was honestly that clear. I saw her through the crowd, and I remember just thinking to myself, it's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And I knew right then I was going to go talk to her. And I wasn't normally that kind of guy. I didn't just walk up to women and approach them like that. I really didn't need to. My restaurants were very successful. I just seemed to meet girls that way, but I said, I'm going to go talk to her. So I walked right up and sort of stood next to her table where she was with a couple of friends. And I heard the word Mezzaluna uttered, and I knew that was my in. So I sort of wedged myself in the conversation and told her who I was, and Mezzalunas were my restaurants. And she was impressed and told me instantly that she lived right down the street from the Mezzaluna in Brentwood, and it was her favorite place. So I knew I had an in. So I took the ball and ran with it from that point. I invited her in for dinner that night with her friends. She said she had her kids with her. She told me instantly that she had come to Aspen to get away from her abusive husband in Los Angeles, that she had just left him and basically came to Aspen to escape him. So I didn't ask who he was. I didn't care. So we had dinner. She had dinner at my restaurant that night with her friends. And after dinner, we sort of arranged to go out and have some drinks, which made me extremely happy because I wanted to spend time with her and get to know her. And we went out to a local club there in Aspen, spent the whole evening dancing and getting to know each other a little bit more. And I inadvertently found out later in that evening while we were dancing that OJ was the ex-husband that she had left. And that was just serendipitously. A friend of mine came up while she was on the dance floor and said, "Hey man, that's the Juice's wife, OJ Simpson." I'm like, what? So I asked her when she came back to the table, and she's like, "Well, I guess now you know." But it was almost like not a topic of conversation, just to like, well, it is what it is. So we hung out that night. She was heading back to Aspen the next day. She made it very clear to me that her marriage was over, that she had moved into her own residence, and was filing for divorce. And she would love to see me when I got to Aspen. When I got to Los Angeles, I told her in about 2 months, my normal routine would be to come back to LA and spend time with those restaurants. So we arranged to meet when I got out there and kind of pick up where that night had taken us. And we talked every day on the phone up until then. And when I got to LA, we just picked up where it left off in Aspen that night. And we started to date and became much closer very rapidly. And the stalking started instantly. The first night I got to town, I just couldn't wait to see her. So I went to her house. And we were in the hot tub just talking about how good it was to see each other. And instantly the phone started ringing incessantly. And she knew it was him. So we kind of looked around in the backyard in Brentwood. We're like, what? We knew we were being watched, whether it was by him or a private detective. We didn't know. But the second night I was in town, Nick had arranged to bring some of her girlfriends to Mezzaluna in Beverly Hills, not the Brentwood location. But we used to do a big celebrity star-studded night on Tuesday nights. And her girlfriends had caught wind of it, and they were excited to be a part of it because it was kind of a hot ticket to get into. So I said, yeah, bring your lady friends down. I'll have a table waiting for you. I knew it was a perfect opportunity for me to spend more time with her and to sort of get introduced to some of her friends, kind of be brought into that circle. As a guy, you want that. You're trying to get close to a lady that you just met. You want to meet her friends. You want to learn about her life. So invited them down. I had a table waiting for them. They came in. We're having a great time. All of a sudden, the Bentley comes screeching up to the front door. The windows are all glass in that restaurant right off of Rodeo Drive. And of course, you look out and OJ jumps out of the Bentley and comes storming through the front door right up to our table, slams his hands down, stares into my eyes and says, I'm OJ Simpson and she's still my wife. So that was my first introduction face-to-face to OJ Simpson. Second night I was in LA, and then it just snowballed from there. And there's obviously other incidents of stalking that took place.
Wow. You seem pretty comfortable talking about it now. How long did it take you to get to this point where you could openly talk about everything?
Well, you got to remember, I was a witness for the grand jury, so I had to rehash all these incidents, and we lived it in real time. And what happened was, what makes my story so unique and my perspective is Nick only really had about an 18-month period in her adult life where she had some freedom, where she was able to sort of explore her womanhood, so to speak, and meet other people and have a good time. I happened to be in that segment, obviously. I met her right after she left him. So I caught her in that sweet spot, so to speak. We dated for a period of time. In that year and a half, she dated a couple other guys, but they never took her out. I was the guy who didn't care. It didn't bother me that it was OJ Simpson. I was in love with this girl. So we lived it in real time. We watched it happen. And because of the stalking incidents and what transpired with us, she felt comfortable to tell me about a lot of other stuff that she had been through in her life at the hands of OJ Simpson. Beatings, mental abuse, physical abuse, all that stuff. And I don't think she really ever shared that with too many people. I don't think she fully shared it with her family or even her close friends. Victims of abuse aren't often proud that they allow it to happen. So she felt comfortable telling me because we were living it, because OJ was putting us through that. So she started to open up to me as we became closer and closer and told me about a lot of events that took place. So I knew all that. And I thought that was so important to tell the prosecution, the police after the murders, because I wanted as much of that to come into play as possible. I knew it was him instantly when I found out. My heart told me, but then as I started to analyze the evidence and find out some of the facts, I knew it was him. So I wanted to do whatever I could to get up there in a court of law and help convict this guy of this brutal murder of Nick and Ron. And not too many people even mention Ron's name, which is sad. I mention Ron in the book. I talk about, even though I didn't know Ron, I had left Mezzaluna restaurants several months before the murders. Ron was hired during that period of time. So I didn't have a personal knowledge of Ron. I knew all the other management staff at Brentwood. I had hired them and trained them. But this guy, I mentioned in the book that I thank him. I think he showed up, and I think he fought for his life, and I think he fought for Nicole's life. And it's just sad that he gave his life, trying to defend her. And I want him to get credit for that. I want people to understand that this poor guy walked into something beyond his control and tried to protect someone and suffered the ultimate consequence of it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Justin.
No, I guess my mind keeps going back to the funeral and you being a pallbearer and you being in the same room with the guy that everyone believes murdered her. What was that like? Was all the family just glaring at him for even being there? Like I wasn't really around to follow that, but
let me give you a little brief synopsis of how that all shook out.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I flew to Los Angeles, I flew into LA. I was in Atlanta when Nick was murdered. So I wasn't even in LA, but I got a hold of the family instantly the next morning as we were finding out information. And we were obviously all just devastated. And they asked me if I could come to LA and be a part, be a pallbearer, be a part of the funeral. So I agreed instantly. It took me a day or so to book a flight. So I didn't get to Los Angeles until Wednesday, 2 days after, the bodies were discovered. The funeral was Thursday morning, first thing. So I flew into LA, didn't see the family face to face because they were in Orange County.
Sure.
So I get to the church the next morning as a pallbearer. So my first interaction with the Brown family was as they pulled up to the church at the mass and got out of their limousines. But first, before that happened, OJ pulled up to the church. So here am I and the other pallbearers all standing around Nick's casket, and OJ gets out of the limousine and he's got Sydney and Justin, one in each hand, the two children that I was, had the honor of teaching to ski and teaching to ride bikes too. When Nick and I were together, we spent a lot of time together, such great children. And he gets out of the car and he's got these dark glasses on, and, you could tell he was drugged up on something, but he walks over towards the casket and all the pallbearers and, gives the old hug and kind of handshake kiss to all the pallbearers except me. He wouldn't even make eye contact with me. So that in itself told me instantly that he still harbored resentment. He wasn't thinking about his wife being dead. He was thinking about, he wish I were dead. I could feel that vibe. So I'm going through that. Like I explained earlier, all my emotions are swirling around. Then the Browns pull up and get out of their car. And as they approach me, hugs and kisses, because it's the first time we were face to face. And that's when I was told what I told you earlier. Denise, I believe, the eldest sister, said, "Keith, do you know what we were talking about that night?" And I was like, she said, my mom said, well, what about Keith? You're single now, you're away from OJ, because she had made that decision. And it was a topic of conversation at dinner that night at Mezzaluna, that was it. They were done. There was no turning back. And she said, I'm going to surprise him, meaning me. And I didn't know if that meant get a phone call or she was going to fly to Aspen to see me or surprise me. But to know in that moment that someone I cared so deeply for, that was lying next to me in a casket, and hadn't spoken to for months and months because of OJ, was thinking of me the night she was murdered. 2 hours later, she was dead. So, man, crazy. So that was the funeral in a nutshell, if that helps explain it.
It does. Thank you.
So, Keith, you've worked in the restaurant business for quite some time. What's that experience been like for you?
Well, it's all I knew. I was a computer engineering major in college at Arizona State. Actually had a very good time. Microsoft, I remember, was on campus recruiting code writers when I was a freshman. And I don't know, maybe I should have taken that job back. That might have worked out pretty well. But I couldn't see myself behind a desk doing that. I liked it when I was in high school because no one else knew how to do it. So it sort of set me apart from people in high school. I thought, oh, I'm the computer nerd. I'm the geek in high school, but everybody kind of looked up to that. I got to college. It was a dime a dozen for guys like me. And I was working in the restaurant business to pay my tuition and put me through school. I was trying to walk on to Arizona State's baseball team, which was way out of my league, by the way. But I gave it a shot. But I had an affinity for the restaurant business. I liked it. I enjoyed it. The money was good at the time. So I just sort of phased out of the college into the full-time restaurant stuff. And I stayed with it. Ultimately, from there, after college, moved to Southern California, where I upped my game to a more high scale, high level of operation, which eventually led me to Aspen, where in the book I described my hospitality venture in detail, how it led me to this star-studded, celebrity-driven restaurants that I was a part of. I mean, my A-list clientele was unrivaled between Mezzaluna and Aspen, Christmas, New Year's, all the craziness that goes on in Aspen. Then I opened Mezzaluna Beverly Hills, a block off of Rodeo Drive. Then I opened Mezzaluna Brentwood. Then I opened the Monkey Bar in Los Angeles. And you want to talk about celebrities. Monkey Bar was a whole nother level. It was owned by Jack Nicholson, Don Henley, and a gentleman named Alan Finkelstein were the primary partners. But there wasn't a night in there when there wasn't 10 to 20 of the top celebrities in the world at the time that were in the restaurant full time. And Nick and Faye used to love to come and hang out with me in there. It was just good people watching and a lot of fun. But to answer your question, I loved the restaurant business. I seemed to have an affinity for it. As I climbed the ladder in it, I was making better and better money, more and more connections. I stuck with it, and it seemed to be what I was good at, so I made a career out of it.
You mentioned Jack Nicholson, who's my favorite actor of all time. What was that? What was it like meeting him?
Man, let me tell you something. He's the best. I don't have a bad word to say about Jack. He's just like you would imagine he'd be. He's hysterical. He doesn't give a shit about anything. He's absolutely a riot. He's like you see on TV, and he's down to earth, surprisingly. And he was in the Monkey Bar every night. I actually knew Jack from Aspen. And part of the reason we did the Monkey Bar, my company, is Alan Finkelstein, who was Jack's art dealer and best friend at the time. They were so impressed, him and Jack, with the operation that we ran in Aspen and then the Beverly Hills and Brentwood Mezzalunas, that they wanted us to be the partners in Monkey Bar. So I was the lead guy. So obviously I came out, did the construction, built it, hired, trained the whole staff, got the place up and running, then oversaw operations. And during the 3 months that I was doing the build out, I lived in Nicole's house. I was
that's wild.
Her kind of roommate at the time, because we had gone through our romantic phase, which in the book, you find out how that sort of came to an abrupt end because of all the stalking. And there was one final incident where Nick and I just sort of looked at each other. Timing wise, I was only in LA for about 3 months. I was heading back to Aspen anyway, but it all coincided. But we just sort of looked at each other, that last event that took place, and said, wow, he's not going to let this happen. Let's just step back a little bit. I'm going back to Aspen. Let's see how things develop. We love each other. We're going to stay friends for sure. Let's just see what happens. And I wanted to give Nick some freedom. Like I said earlier, she had that small period of time. I wanted her, if she wanted to see another guy, I wanted her to see another guy. If she wanted to date someone, it didn't bother me. I shouldn't say that because it kind of bothered me. I was in love with her, but I really wanted her to get that experience. Most people, in their early 20s, they go through that phase, they grow up. She met OJ at 18. He plucked her out of society. She was under his thumb from the time she was 18 until they divorced in 92 when I met her. So 15 years she was controlled by him. And then when they tried the reconciliation, for that year and a half, she was controlled by him up until the day she was murdered. So that one time frame was about 18 months in the middle, was her golden age where she got to experience, some stuff.
Well, I want to ask you one last question before we let you go. And what was your reaction to the verdict? I mean, obviously it wasn't super positive.
Well, the crazy thing is, as far as the trial goes, what most people don't realize is I was under subpoena to both the prosecution and the defense. I was supposed to be the first witness in the trial, and the prosecution was basing a large portion of the trial on domestic violence and stalking, which was all about myself. I mean, so they knew that. It went off the rails when it got to Furman, and it became a race sort of based operation. The trial was, and it got off the rails, and the prosecution was reacting instead of being proactive. They were just reacting to what the defense was doing, and they got off track. So they pushed my testimony back. They were going to use me as the last witness to sort of reintroduce domestic violence at the end, because they opened with Denise Brown. So she gave them some domestic violence in the beginning. After they had flown me out to be one of the first witnesses, they said they were going to save me till the end. So they sent me back to sort of hide out and wait to testify. During that period of the time, the defense subpoenaed me more of as a publicity stunt for the media to say, well, if OJ didn't kill this guy after watching him have sex with his wife through the window of the house, which everybody knows about that. That's a widely reported event, one of the stalking events. Then why would he kill this Ron Goldman guy? So, they did it as a ploy. They were never going to put me on the witness stand. But to answer your question, I couldn't watch the trial because I was under subpoena. So I didn't know what was going on a day-to-day basis, but I was aware that it had gotten off the rails and was pointed more towards race every day. And I was fearful, knowing what I knew about the LA riots, having been with Nicole during that period of time. I knew the history in Los Angeles. I knew the DA and the police department were, not very well respected, especially by the African-American community. So I was fearful of the verdict. I knew the racial makeup of the jury. So I was hoping that they would put that aside and base everything on the evidence, but I was prepared for a not guilty verdict. So I was on the fence, hoping so much, but prepared for the worst. And obviously we all know that we got delivered the worst verdict possible.
I do have one more question. It'd be remiss to not talk about the Bronco car chase. Like, did you watch that live? Was that what was it like being like just around that whole scenario?
Well, it was crazier than you think, because I described this in the book and nobody knew this. This is a story I never talked about before, and I'll give you the short version of it. At the funeral, after the funeral, we went back to Nick's family's house, and we're celebrating Nick's life basically. And we had made arrangements the next day, which was when the Bronco chase happened, to inventory everything in Nicole's condo where she was murdered at. So we were all going to meet there. I slept a little later than they did because I hadn't slept in 4 days. So I was showing up about an hour or two after the Brown family had arrived, and my best friend, Ron Hardy, whose apartment I was staying in 2 blocks from Nicole's house. So they were all there. So not knowing what was going on with OJ and, him being wanted, or, them trying to arrest him. So as I'm walking up to her condo, the police let me by. They knew who I was. So I'm coming up the back alleyway. And as I'm approaching the Bundy townhome, I hear a voice screaming at me through the top window, Keith, get out of here. Just leave. And I was dumbfounded. And then I saw Ron Hardy, my best friend, screaming the same thing through the window. And I just turned and ran. I ran back to Ron's house. Now, remember, this is pre-cell phones, so there wasn't that instant communication thing. So I'm back at Ron's house 2 blocks away, just on pins and needles. What was that all about? It was about an hour until Ron made his way back to his apartment and just shaking his head, looking at me. And he goes, dude, right as you were walking up, OJ called the townhouse, called the condo. Denise answered, and he said, I'm on my way over there to finish what I started. We didn't know if that meant coming to kill me, coming to kill them, coming to kill himself. Nobody knew. But in that instant, they thought of my safety, knowing that if OJ was on his way over there in a desperate situation and I was there, I was the guy that was going to suffer the wrath. So as Ron and I are discussing that back at his house, we turn on the TV. Bam, there comes Gil Garcetti. OJ's a wanted man. OJ's a fugitive from justice. We are actively seeking OJ Simpson. And the whole thing unfolded in real time right in front of us on the TV. But I was 2 blocks away from where Nick was murdered and about a mile away from the Rockingham estate as it was all going on with helicopters swarming. So it was crazy. It was surreal.
Yeah, I believe.
Wow. Everybody, the book is called Stalked. Here's the cover of the book right here. Guys, go check it out. I definitely am going to check it out. Your story is fascinating, Keith, and you're welcome on our show anytime. Where can everybody find you and the book online?
It's available on Amazon. Is the only place you can purchase it. I do have a website dedicated to the book. I was unable to get the title of the book. It was already taken, but the website is ojstalkedme.com. So if you go to ojstalkedme.com, it's a website dedicated to the book. It'll tell you all about the book. It gives you a bio on myself, a bunch of other information. And there's 2 direct links to Amazon on the website that you can purchase the book right there. So, and it's called Stalked. It Could Have Been Me, for a reason, because not only did the thought cross my mind multiple times over the years, but most people that knew of my relationship with Nicole were convinced it was me in the early hours of the investigation, because Ron was declared as an unidentified male for the first hours. So all my friends and even some of my family that couldn't reach me were convinced that I was the guy that was murdered that night along with Nicole.
Yeah, what a stressful couple hours for them. Good grief.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, wow.
Well, everybody, the link is in the description down below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.